is really quick today.
Okay, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show. I'm here with the Sumer Sports CEO, Thomas Dimitroff. I'm one of the VPs at Sumer Sports, Eric Eager. I'm a little under the weather today. I was questionable coming in, but my model said, my model puts me at about 0.85 times my normal ability, which, the people in the peanut gallery would say, 0.85 times 0 is still 0. So I'm going to make it. Thomas is 100% today. So you're going to get full Thomas today. Happy Monday. Our first Monday without football in forever, right? Because we had the national championship game a couple weeks ago. We had Super Wildcard Weekend. We had 2 games last Monday. We don't have football now for 6 days in a row, Thomas. What did you think of this weekend's games?
Look, let me lead in. I'm sorry you're not feeling that well, but you survive. You're a resilient guy. You have is that a Minnesota shirt on there?
It is. It's my Midwest roots. This sweatshirt is damn near 20 years old. I gotta tell you, but it's made it with me this whole time. I'm honestly I've lost about 10 pounds over the last month or so. I feel good that I can fit into this comfortably after all these years. But yeah, and Sean Donahue, Sky Uma, yeah. Look, I wish PJ Fleck, who I like a lot, could manage the clock a little bit better. But I'm still a Gophers fan. But yeah, thank you very much for the acknowledgement of the Minnesota sweatshirt.
Well, look, to your point, loved this weekend, loved the games. I loved watching them. I was comfortable, was really anchored in. It was cold here in Atlanta, as everyone knows, really, really, mid 16s or whatever it was in the 30s. So it allowed you to feel that much more comfortable, put the fire on and watch a lot of football. That said, there were some unbelievable moments. I can't get it out of my mind. And I'm not a so-called softie that way. I mean, this is this business, but watching Tyler Bass, watching that missed field goal, you probably put yourself in there going, gosh, if that was my son. And yet, they've signed up for that position. I get it. What a tough situation to be. And, I've been in that spot, somewhat in that spot before, but not in that spot that was a whole city. You saw some of those people, the fans in the crowd crying, literally, dudes and gals, right? There's a lot going on there. What I'm saying in the end is I feel for them because the Bills, we can talk about them, right? You want to lead in with the Bills. Let's talk about the whole setup. What do we think of that?
Yeah, my college roommate, Kyle Wilcox, was my kicker in college, and he missed a game-winning kick. And I'll just say it was that night it was tough to get him out of his room, and they do take it hard. And so that is part of the game. Yeah, let's talk about the Bills because there was a pretty interesting, Alex Hussey, one of our listeners, says Diggs won't finish his contract. There's a couple really big things, right? So the Bills, 2017, they trade back from pick 10, right, to pick 27 with the Chiefs. Obviously, the Chiefs take Patrick Mahomes, right? And Bills, they do okay. They take Tre'Davious White, who's a superstar for them. He's been hurt a little bit. Doug Whaley's gone though, right? 2017, they go with Sean McDermott. 2018, they go with Brandon Beane. That's been the new regime. 2018, they draft Josh Allen. 2019 and on, they've made the playoffs every single year. 2020 and on, they've won the division every single year. 2020, they made the conference championship. They bowed out to the Chiefs. Every single year since then, they've lost in this round, the divisional round.
Wow.
And they've gone all in, right? Last year, they gave the big contract to Von Miller. Before last year, they gave the big contract to Stephon Diggs. They gave the big contract to Josh Allen. And now when you look at them, they have, they're over the cap going into next season. And now when people think about being over the cap, they don't necessarily know what that means a little bit, right? Because going over the cap means a couple things. You can cut, like the Los Angeles Chargers when they're over the cap, what it means is they're just going to cut players because of the structure of the deals. They're going to cut guys like, Khalil Mack. They'll cut guys like Mike Williams, maybe Keenan Allen. The way that the Bills situation is structured is they actually have a decision to make, because they can't really necessarily get rid of players to get under the cap. What they have to do is kind of more what New Orleans has done, which is kind of push things more into the future to get cap relief, right? Because they got to take some of these salaries, which are more or less guaranteed, convert them into bonuses, and get cap relief in the present, which yields more, which gives rise to more liabilities in the future. The problem with that is those are more older players. Von Miller this season, Thomas, 12 games, 5 total tackles, no sacks, right?
Yeah.
Stephon Diggs this season, the last 13 games of this year, no 100-yard games. Yesterday, he had under 30 yards receiving in that game. And so I fear for this team because, they have a young quarterback, and he was phenomenal yesterday. He's exactly what you want in a quarterback. And, they have some really good young pieces. Obviously White coming back from an injury. I think Ed Oliver, he's a good defensive tackle. The running back Cook is a good player. Kincaid was a good draft pick. But some of their older pieces, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, guys like that, they're all getting a little older. And in order for them to continue to compete, they're going to have to hang on to veterans who I think their better days are beyond them. And I worry for that because I don't think it's going to get much better for them. And they're going to require increasingly more out of a quarterback who they're already requiring a ton out of.
So there's a lot there. By the way, did you see, and have you seen anything from the owner, Mr. Pagula? Because, he's a driven, competitive, man. And I've seen him in our, over the years in the owners' meetings, outspoken, very outspoken. Has there been anything out there towards head coach and GM? I'm not talking about any sort of drastic moves. I'm just saying, has he expressed his discontent with another year, which is unfortunate because those guys, I believe, and I've said this time and again, I believe both Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott are top-notch, upper echelon duo, right? That said, a guy like, Pagula, Mr. Pagula would say, like, okay, where are we? What are the next steps here? What else can we really do? We have a stud of a quarterback, to your point. I texted you right away when he fumbled that ball. I thought, oh, my God, can you imagine if it ended after a really good game and it ended like that, right? And because he was taking it on. I loved what he was doing. He was basically I am not going to let this end the way that it's ended. And my God, for Buffalo to see a wide right, that's unbelievable. And I think about it as a former GM, and I think about it as a head coach. You leave that stadium at night, and you're thinking, that is a horrible way to go to sleep, right? What's next? What is next?
Well, that's the thing, because the hardest part of the whole thing, like you think about this, and I think about this as far as like, trying to get into shape, right? Or trying to learn something new. When you run, like, let's say you're trying to like run, you're a biker, right? You're a fitness guy in general. Let's say you're trying to get up to biking 25 miles, right? Yeah. The first day you bike 10 miles, the second day you bike 15 miles. Well, the problem is that delta is 5 miles. But the next day you have to bike the first 10 first, and then the next 5, right? You don't go out the next day and have to bike the next 5, right? So the hard part I have for the Bills is like, it's not that you have to win the divisional round again. No, you have to play 17 games again, right? Everybody's got to stay healthy again. Then you got to win the wild card round again. Then you got to win. So like, that's the, like, to your point, and I'm guessing this is how, it feels. It's like, not only do you have to go out and win that game against the Chiefs, right? And that's where I think everybody gets this wrong. It's the grind isn't just winning the game against the Chiefs. The grind is going back out there and fending off the Dolphins again.
Yep.
The grind is going out there and fending off the Jets, who are going to have Aaron Rodgers again. The grind is going out there and, maybe getting the bye, because they've never gotten the bye during this time. And that to me is where I look at it and I'm like, God, because you have a good enough quarterback to beat the Chiefs. Like, they're 3-1 against them in the regular season. right? They go out, they go to Arrowhead and win. He's won in Arrowhead 3 times. Like it's the grind of the going through the season, and we saw that this year. They were 6-6 through 12 games, right? And we know that when the chips are down, they can go and actually play great football. And it's just that by the time you get to the end there, and we saw it with Kansas City 2 years ago, 2 years ago, the Chiefs had a similar struggle where they were kind of, they were struggling. They went to Tennessee and lost by 24, and they got it together, but then they get to the final game and Cincinnati beats them because they're just out of gas, right? Yeah. And I think that's the problem with Buffalo. But what the Chiefs did was they traded Tyreek Hill, they got 10 draft picks in, and I think at some level you have to recycle the roster because the Chiefs needed, when they ran it back in 2020, there were too many players who were like, we just won the Super Bowl last year. Like, we're fed, right? Like, I think you need to get people on the roster who haven't experienced the disappointment that Buffalo has, right? That they're kind of numb to so that it's not like when Patrick Mahomes goes 90 yards, it's not like, oh, here we go again. You know what I mean? And I think you saw a little bit of that with the Ravens the other day where, the Houston Texans return that kick and it goes in halftime tied. And I think a lot of the crowd was kind of like, oh, here we go again. The Ravens are going to, flop in the playoffs again. But the Ravens have recycled. They brought in Roquan. They brought in they brought in enough new blood where, like, no, it's not the same old Ravens. I think you have to do that with Buffalo.
Yes, I think you have to do it with Buffalo. And then I don't want to change subjects because it gets me heated up thinking about it. And then I start going over to the interaction that I was getting texts from a lot of different people, right? And I love a number of people in the Chiefs. Can I just go over here for a minute and we can come back to this? Because this is very important to talk about. When you're building teams, it's vital to make sure you're building with a focus and limit disruptions. And every time we turn around, we've talked about it, we see the Kansas City Chiefs, the quarterback, the head coach, the tight end, and more, et cetera, in commercials. And it's really starting to wear on a lot of people, right? Not to mention, Travis's girlfriend, who every time something happens, what I think is interesting, back to, right, the idea of the emperor's got no clothes, is anyone really sharing that with them? And is the reality if people took a poll, as good as they are, and a lot of people, like, I like Ted Cruz. I love Ted Cruz, one of my favorites. How Ted's navigating through all of this with all of this going on. Has it truly affected? So I think it was funny. I felt like there were a lot of people that were hoping that Kansas City wasn't going to pull it off for that reason, to say, see, you're getting away from yourselves. Go back to who you are because you have all of these other things going on. I don't believe that. I'm just saying there's an interesting bubbling up here of, an agitation with, like, and I don't know, does it have everything to do with a mega superstar who's taking over the football in the United States? I don't know. But
I think they're letting that fuel them. So, like, I watched the game on Christmas, and it was very much like, you look at that sideline, it was awful. But then you watch the week 18, right? So they won against the Bengals, they clinched the division, they clinched the 3 seed. And then week 18, they sat Travis down. And you watch the season, and Travis Kelce looked like very slow and very injured. Well, he got a bone bruise in his knee in week 1, sat, and then played the whole season. Like, that took a toll. This season has been marred, I think, and I think sometimes unfairly, by selfish accusations of selfishness on the part of the Chiefs, right? Like, that has been the whole thing. Like, Tony Dungy said it the other day, blah, 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 right? Mm-hmm. So what did Travis Kelce do? Travis Kelce's been at the center of all this. Travis was 16 yards away from his, 8th consecutive 1,000-yard season. Huge. So what did he do in week 18? He sat down. He did not go after the per individual accolade, right? He sat down, right? Wasn't active for that game. Now, on the other side of the coin, though, Chris Jones, who was going after, I think, like $1.25 million, and he was rushing the passer, trying to get that last sack to get 10 sacks to go after that incentive. But the whole Chiefs sideline, from what I can tell, and I'm good friends with a few the beat reporters and columnists in Kansas City, they were so elated for Chris Jones like there have been a couple of inflection points for this team where I think that there have been some energizing moments for this club where they've allowed the hatred, right? And you've been a part of this, right? You were part of the Patriot paradigm. You won 2 Super Bowl rings with them, where they've allowed the public hatred, because the Patriots in 01, everybody loved that, right? 9/11, they're called the Patriots, right? We all love the Patriots in 01, right? But eventually the Patriots became a hated team, right? And then Spygate happened and all this nonsense. Everybody hated the Patriots. And to a certain extent, Tom Brady and company allowed that to fuel them. And you could tell Patrick Mahomes running off the field, the Bills fans are throwing snowballs at him. Like, I think they allowed this to fuel them. But I think Travis Kelce, in a year where people, I think, accused him, again, probably unfairly, of selfishness, sitting down in week 18, not taking the individual accolade, and coming out and playing his 2 best games of the season physically in the 2 playoff games because he sat down and helped himself physically, I think has obviously helped this team because their offense has actually been really good for once the last 2 weeks. And, you know, and they're going to have a tough matchup. I mean, the Baltimore Ravens pass defense is one of the best that we've seen in modern NFL. But they're you know, they needed all of it yesterday because their defense didn't play great.
I guess what I'm saying, it's a great dialogue. And like I said, Ted Cruz, whoever's in charge of helping all of that, from an owner who I think is the very best and a GM who I think is one of the very best. Of course, we know that the head coach is. I think what's agitating people out there in the football world and around is, okay, yes, there were a lot of anti-New England people over the years, but there was also a control at that time that, you know, Bill would never allow the commercials and et cetera, et cetera. I think people get jealous, right? The hatred is fueled by every time they turn a TV on, some chief is on the television, right? Even, you know, where I just find it interesting that people are like, you know, F this, F that, screw this, screw that. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. They are a damn good football team. Okay. Maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they've been, you know, there's been some, you know, some sort of hindrance of their focus. Okay. Deep breaths now. They win this game and now they focus, right? They're not doing those commercials right now. They were done in the off season, right?
Exactly.
It's again, people think, wow, I mean, how distracted are they? And look, that's why they're doing this, they're that. But they still won, and they're on their way to your point. So I guess all I'm saying in the end is it's amazing to see, like you said, the hatred from it for a team that is really kind of a Midwest, really solid, sound team led by some sound people. But it's perceived because all of the big approach to all of this is much bigger, and especially because of Taylor Swift, right? It just takes it to another level. I've even heard women say, screw that. It makes me sick. And I'm like, wait a minute. I heard you say like 5 weeks ago that
my daughters want to watch the games because of her.
I know.
It's like, I think it's great for the league, of course. We had a good question from my friend, Thankfully Difficult. He says, could the Chiefs just not have paid Chris Jones the bonus and sat him? I think they can. I don't know if that's actually true. Like, can you pay a bonus? I think you're allowed to, right, pay if he has an incentive in his contract for a certain statistic. Are you allowed to pay that out? I think that they're up against the cap enough where if it's like one of those likely to be earned situations, it is touchy, right?
It's touchy, but I want to make sure I understand that question. Do you want to bring it up?
So Chris Jones had 9.5 sacks going into week 18. He had a $1.25 million bonus if he got to 10 sacks or more. And so he played to get that sack.
Yeah.
And so he gets the bonus. Could the Chiefs have just paid him that money as like a bonus and sat him to preserve him for the playoffs? Even if he didn't achieve. Exactly. You just basically sat him and paid him.
No, you have to achieve that. You have to achieve that marker.
Right. I think that some teams do that, but I think the Chiefs are up against the cap enough. And there's a cap. We have to go to Chase on this, but like there's a likely to be earned and not likely to be earned classification where if it's a not likely to be earned, it gets prorated to the next year. And I think that's how it gets accounted for in the Chiefs cap. And so, you know, that I think that if they were to do that, it would be applied to this year. And so then they would be screwed if they wanted to like sign somebody during the playoffs to like deal with an injury right now, and they're dealing with like a Joe Tooney injury, for example, which could be a problem.
Let's get it clear so we're giving the right information out. I guess we can probably tweet it out, right? Or you can.
Yeah.
We can go down the hallway here and confirm that. What if I'm following what you're asking?
Yeah. So basically, they're just asking. Yeah, they're asking if you can pay an incentive out even if he doesn't achieve it. And I there have been teams that have done it before. And the question is I believe it's basically how it's accounted for under the cap if you do that.
Yes, but you can't just say you that's like giving someone extra money if you didn't achieve 10 and he was only at 8 or 9. That's dicey, and we've been in that before, and that's a fine line, like you said. I'm sure there's always ways around certain things, but it's also nebulous, and that's like, hey, I'm giving a bonus, but we're not really accounting for it. Here's another. That we've had that before. We've had it on both sides, right?
Yeah.
At least when I was in Atlanta, it's like, let's just give it to them for morale purposes. You can't just do that.
Well, and you can't give it to everybody. Well, and the whole point of the Chris Jones thing was like you're sort of holding the line because you held the line all offseason and then you cave at the end. Chris Jones is a special player for them, so it could be tenuous. Okay, we only have about 15 minutes left, so let's talk about the openings right now. So just to get people up to speed, Las Vegas takes the interim tag away from Antonio Pierce. He is their head coach. New England hires Gerard Mayo as a part of the apprentice. He was basically the heir apparent to Bill Belichick in contract, so they didn't have to really interview everybody. Those have been the two. There have been, rumors that Ben Johnson is linked to Washington, but that is not confirmed, and they are still interviewing people. So we're not going to go with that. Bill Belichick has interviewed multiple times in Atlanta, but so is Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh has interviewed multiple times with the Los Angeles Chargers, and then Tennessee and Seattle have interviewed multiple people as well. On the GM front, Adam Peters is the GM of the Washington Commanders, although they have not done anything with Martin Mayhew, who still has the title of GM. So there's two people that have the title of GM in Washington. Carolina is reported today that they are closing in on making their current assistant GM, Dan Morgan, the GM, and making Brant Tillis, the current VP of football operations with the Kansas City Chiefs, the senior VP of football operations with the Panthers. But again, that's not confirmed. That's just the rumor. And then we have Las Vegas has not picked a GM yet. Which other one are we? And then the Los Angeles Chargers have not picked a GM yet. A lot of wide open races here, Thomas. Which one intrigues you the most?
Oh my gosh. I'm sitting there listening to you go from, at 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever you're doing. I'm like, that's your mathematical mind. I'm like, me compartmentalize. I'm like, let's take one at a time, but you don't want to do that. Of course, you decided you're going to throw it out there. Which one intrigues me most? Wow. Where do you want to start? Look, we're in Atlanta. I don't want to stay too long on this topic. It's amazing to see how things are flying around here. Let's just talk about Bill Belichick quickly. The fact that he is, as we've said before, an unbelievable acquisition out there. Never in my mind, again, I don't think there's never going to be an opportunity again to have a Hall of Fame coach with such stature and such ability as Bill Belichick for this group of owners and this group of general managers. I don't think it comes around. It just doesn't come around. It's very, very rare that person doesn't, retire. He's not. And I think there is talk out there that, would he be in it for 2 years? To me, I think that's ridiculous. He's not in it just to be in it for 2 years. I don't believe that. I think the opportunity for a team, whether it's Atlanta or not, whoever it is, I think they can do, I think it's unbelievable that there wouldn't be more teams, or not more teams. Like, where is he going to land and what is he going to do for that team? He helps bring them the closest to being a Super Bowl champion, I think, in the next 3 to 4 years than anyone. Not that there's not other great coaches out there and opportunities. So I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on Atlanta just because it's not my place to be commenting on that, as you know. But it's interesting. Where else is it? So go ahead. You're about ready to.
I think the interesting one is New England, right? Who doesn't appear with Belichick gone, right? Belichick is a humongous character as far as that history of that franchise.
Yeah.
2000 is when he started. Obviously they had Pioli, they had you, they had, and then when Pioli left and you left, he's kind of been the guy there, running personnel. And there's now rumors that they're going to basically wait until after the draft to have a general manager, if at all, right? Mm-hmm. Where they're going to have some guys possibly, kind of tag team the draft. And I actually, frankly, and this is a good question, I kind of want to get your opinion on this. I actually don't hate the idea of, if you're a first-time general manager, now you might disagree because you knocked your first draft out of the park and kind of set yourself up for your success. But because you're kind of taking over, right? And you're kind of probably using somebody else's grades, somebody else's scouts, right? If you're, there is like some, I think, merit to kind of pulling back a little bit, maybe trading back a little bit, and using that first draft as an information gathering session as opposed to going all in. Like, what do you think about the Patriots approach that they're using right now, which is kind of slow playing this thing and waiting maybe to use sort of like the whole, basically waiting a year before they hire a GM?
Well, as you know, they have Matt Groh there right now, right? Matt is very adept at what he does. He's a really good football mind, having been grown up with his dad being a head coach at the University of Virginia and in other places, of course. He's got brothers. He knows it well. I'm sure the Kraft family, Robert and Jonathan, have a really good feel for what they have in place already. And their feeling is they already have the draft and free agency well underway, that they can ride that wave to the other side of it. Like you said, maybe get more people in there to help out a little bit. I mean, that's ultimately going to be up to what they believe, how far along they are with their, with the free agency set up and with their draft set up. So I don't think it's out of control thinking, wow, are they really going to proceed through the spring and get to the fall or get to the end of the spring and make a decision. I think of all places, this is one of the places that I think could pull that off, right? Because they're hiring a coach that's within their system. I think that's sound. When you start looking at some of these other places, people are asking me back to, GMs being in place at certain places, GMs being replaced. There's a difference there, right? We can talk a little bit about this. And I can go round and round about this. If you're a first-time general manager or you're a fairly very young general manager in the world, do you want, I'm going to throw this out to you. You haven't had this hat on, but would you want a head coach coming in who is the dude, or do you want to be able to have more of a shoulder-to-shoulder relationship with that head coach? Meaning you're Adam Peters. Let's use that as an example. Mm-hmm. Does Adam want Coach Belichick to come up there, or does Adam, and it's not fair to put it on Adam, but hypothetically, or does Adam want Ben Johnson to come up there because two young guys in their positions growing together? I had that with Mike Smith. It was what I wanted at that time. I will tell you, as the years went on, I would be a lot more comfortable, of course, because you're security and you understand where you are. It would be a lot easier for me to deal with, not just deal, that's the wrong word, to coexist with a really, really sound, big power type of a head coach, knowing what you guys both know, because there's a confidence there. Some would argue otherwise. Wow, I don't want two power hitters at the top. It's just going to be butting heads. Well, I think that's a really interesting conversation.
I think some of it is your experience too, right? Like Peters, right? His experience is looking at Lynch and Shanahan, mm-hmm. who, when they were hired in San Francisco, it's two guys were hired to the same length contract, and then they both had the same length contract every time they got an extension, and they were both first-time GM head coach, right? And they had a thematic consistency the whole time. So if I were him, which I'm not, but if I were him, I'd probably want the Ben Johnson character, right? Because you've seen this thing modeled before. And so you probably have the best idea of how that works relative to seeing like sort of the Parcells, Belichick, kind of that alpha male, that alpha guy coming in and you being the subservient guy. Now, you've been in way more rooms, so you probably would be able to navigate that situation. But Peters is only, maybe he's seen more, but he's seen like that modeled successfully in San Francisco that way. And so my guess would be the preference would be that. if you're somebody like Brant Tillis, right, and you're going, and you've seen in Kansas City, you've seen the Pioli, seen the Pioli and the Haley right away, where that parallelism didn't work, right? And then you see Reed and Dorsey, and Reed won the power struggle, and then Brett Veach kind of earned his way to the kind of equal, but it's still kind of Andy Reid's world and everybody else is living in it. Maybe it's less that way, right? And maybe you're more comfortable in a situation where the head coach gets more control than not. You know what I'm saying? So I think a lot of times you kind of, just the same way as in academia, right? Like if you have a PhD advisor who likes to meet daily, you might be a PhD advisor who wants your students to meet daily. It's the same way, I think.
So you've hit it on all of those. It's really, really interesting to see how this is going to play out. Again, you have Rand Carthon in Tennessee. Where is he going to be? Who is he going to go after? And when you start seeing the people that they're interviewing, and my feeling is after Mike Vrabel's has been there, and he's a very powerful, strong-willed guy who has a presence. Is it a natural inclination for an organization and a GM to say, let's get a younger guy in here. We can work together. We can coexist. Very interesting. But then I start thinking about the young guys versus the established guys. And I think of a guy who is very different. I think about a guy like Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn can go both ways from the standpoint of he could work really well with the young GM, Eric, and he can also work very well with the GM that's been around because he understands both sides of it. He understands that Dan is a very good coexisting person, right? He coexists well. He communicates very, very well. And I think that's a positive for whoever. If he goes up, John Snyder is existing longtime GM. He could kick butt with him up there, but I also think he could go in and work with Dan Morgan as a potential, first-time executive, whatever ends up happening there. If Brant Tillis is the GM there and Dan is an associate or one of the VPs of personnel, that's a blockbuster threesome in my mind, what they got going there. And Dan is the type of guy that could work in that situation. And then you think about Mike Vrabel very quickly. Mike's got a strong suit about him, right? Mike's not just going in and he's not just going to be, hey, I'm going to come in and listen to, a 40-year-old general manager. And it's bad to put ages. So that has to be the right spot. Just like Jim Harbaugh is not going in after his time with Trent Baalke. He's got to pick his ownership and he's got to pick his general manager situation right. When you go in as a head coach in today's world, there is a lot of discussion about who your GM is going to be, wherever it is. Put Coach Belichick aside for a minute. Whatever they're looking at in Atlanta, there's a lot of discussion there, as you can imagine. What happens with the internal there already, right? They've already stated that they are keeping Terry Fontenot in that role. Terry's a good man. A lot of people like him in the building, et cetera, et cetera. Who comes in there and how does that build? How does that grow, right? That's a really important thing for a head coach. If Mike Vrabel knocks on the door in Atlanta, how do they approach that? How does Mike inquire about how that all works out? It's really interesting.
Yeah, and right, and if you're Terry, like how do you handle that situation? Are you relieved, but the fact that it's not Belichick, but Vrabel might be equally powerful in the end of the day, and so it might be equally difficult for you, even though you thought that at first. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a really tough situation. It's a very interesting situation. I do think that one of these very good, and before we have to go here, so there's a ton of very good candidates, right? You think about Harbaugh, obviously Vrabel, you have Belichick, Quinn, and then you have some of the young, and then Raheem Morris, who I think is a very good. And then you have the two new guys, I think, obviously Johnson and Mike McDonald, who I think put on a clinic the other day for the Ravens. He'll have a big test against Patrick Mahomes this weekend. I think, unfortunately, one of those guys is going to get left out, or two of those guys. One or two of those guys are going to get left out. It'll be interesting to see which one is that person because, sometimes we saw this with Ron Rivera 2 decades ago. Ron Rivera kept getting left out like every single year. And then eventually he got the job 4 or 5 years later. Eric Bieniemy was that guy that kept getting left out. Ben Johnson took a big chance this year by staying as a coordinator. It very much looks like he's going to get a job this year, but it is tough sometimes when you are that like hotshot coordinator and those jobs happen and you are kind of that N plus first. You're sort of that that last person in the musical chairs. It remains to be seen whether or not all those men will get the job that they want, because there's only so many gigs. But it is interesting with Belichick as well that it does seem like Atlanta is the one job that he's been linked to. If that one doesn't work out, I'm interested to see where which team comes calling, because that so far has been the one job he's been linked to.
Well, look, I think it's going to just be really, really interesting. To your point earlier, what a great group. I don't normally throw around great, but I mean, in the scope of it all, what a really great group to be picking from, right? For all of these owners and the sort of selection group for these teams, this isn't just a couple randos here and there. Like this is legitimate. So it's going to be really interesting to see.
There's no wah hires. Let's just put it that way. Among these, so.
And they all have
hires either.
No, exactly. And they all have their amazing positives, and they all have some of their challenges that people have to answer the questions, right? Dan Quinn goes in, he answers questions about an historic loss in the Super Bowl. Of course he does. Mike Vrabel comes in and answers the questions about, hey man, what was the power struggle there, right? Jim Harbaugh, great coach, as we all know, he comes in, they're going to ask questions. I know what happened with Trent Baalke back in the day, your last, there's going to be questions that need to be answered. And part of your job as one of these coaches is to go in, be very honest, not throw darts, be as honest as you can. That's what these groups want to know. They don't want people throwing darts. Raheem Morris, Raheem deserves another chance in this league. And that. We've talked about it, right? 100%. And he's going to have to answer the questions. But those questions were 12 years ago, right? That man has learned.
He's changed.
That's right.
He's evolved, certainly, with the game as well. So This has been a great show. We thank you all for coming. Thank you all for the great comments and your patience with my voice. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Tell somebody about the show. For Thomas Dimitroff, for Eric Eager, we'll see you on Wednesday. This has been the Sumer Sports Show.